Hi everyone, my name is Jade.
And my name is Tionne.
And we will be your hosts for today's new episode of All Tea No Sugar. And joining us today is Rohini Singh, an attorney from Advocates for Children.
Hi everyone.
Today we'll be discussing the New York City Discipline Code, but as you can see, we have this amazing food right in front of us, which we've all never eaten from this place before, but we know to expect good things. We have chicken wings, fries, baked macaroni, cornbread, collard greens, sweet yams, and moisoyando from the Mango Deli.
If you begin to crave some of this food while watching this video, you can purchase some right here in the Bronx from Fish Fry and Soul Food located on 2558 Grand Concourse Avenue.
So let's get started. So about the Discipline Code, what's this 40-page book?
So the 40-page book, the New York City Discipline Code, is a collection of all of the different types of discipline that New York City public schools can impose on students.
So Tionne, did you know that it existed, or when did you find out about the existence of the Discipline Code?
Well, I kind of found out about it about a couple of months ago, last month or two, when I went to the SBU workshop at NYU. How about you?
Earlier this year, when around the first time I facilitated for SBU, that's when I actually got a good look at it and what was in it. And then I started to realize, oh, all these things that my school didn't talk about, but I'm finding it right here in the bottom of my drawer. So, Rohini, what kind of information can we find in this book?
So the Discipline Code has a lot of information about the different types of discipline, and specifically it has a lot of information about students' rights in the discipline process. Mm-hmm. And so the first whole section of the Discipline Code goes over the different types of discipline that can happen in schools. It goes over the different types of the lengths of suspensions that can happen, and then the types of notice that the Department of Education is responsible for giving students and parents when they're suspended.
So what are suspensions?
So there are a few different types of suspensions. There are classroom removals, there are principal suspensions, and then there are superintendent suspensions. And so classroom removals are sort of the least serious of all types of discipline. And that is when a teacher removes a student from a class for a period of between 1 and 4 days. And usually teachers will do this if the student is somehow disrupting the class. And what a lot of students don't know is during classroom removals, the teacher must notify the principal every time they remove a student from the class, and then the principal has to call the student's parent. And then in addition to classroom removals, there are also principal suspensions and then superintendent suspensions. And so principal suspensions are for 1 to 5 days, and then superintendent suspensions are for any suspension over 6 days.
So can a school just suspend students?
No, for all of these different types of discipline or suspensions, the school is required to provide some form of notice to the parent. And it's different depending on the different type of suspension. So for classroom removals, it's a phone call. For principal suspensions, it's a written notice. And then for superintendent suspension, again, it's a written notice that the parent must receive.
Okay, so just to make sure, those are the processes to make suspensions official, or no?
Yes, so a suspension is technically not a legal suspension unless the school follows the specific procedures that are required before a suspension.
So, Tionne, earlier you talked about how you believed you were unfairly suspended from your school. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, last year or so, I had gotten suspended from school because of my friend who was in a fight, and my friend didn't get hit first in the fight, so they both got suspended, and me and a couple of other friends felt wronged about it. We felt like she was wrong. Well, that she was wronged about getting suspended. So we went to the deans and everything, and we told them how we felt, and they said that we was like rioting. So they suspended all of us for like a week or so, I think. And yeah, it was like dumb to get suspended for something like that if we didn't really like cause a ruckus, because we just went to the dean's office and not like really did anything like loud or something like that.
So when they suspended you, did they inform your parents at the time?
Not really. They just said like, oh, you're suspended, and they just, after that day, they kept us in the dean's office, and they was like, oh, your parent has to come in, but they never really said, oh, you're suspended. It was just like the next day I came into school, I just stayed in the dean's office because I wasn't supposed to be there.
They didn't tell you?
Well, they was like, oh, you're suspended, but they didn't really say, like, they didn't really like tell my parents. They just said that the parent has to come in for a parent-teacher conference. And then the next day I came into school, they was like, oh, you came without your parent? Oh, stay in the dean's office, you're suspended.
What happened the rest of the days? Did they make you stay home those days, or did you go to school the rest of the week?
Well, I had went home that day because I had spent the whole day in the dean's office, and I was like, oh, they said I'm suspended. And of course, when you tell your parent you're suspended, they come to like the school and stuff like that for the parent-teacher conference. So my mom ended up going to the parent-teacher conference, and I ended up still suspended, even though I really didn't do anything. So I just stayed home. I just stayed home for the rest of the suspension. And when I came back, I got suspended next to like the testing days, and that's when I like failed. And they didn't even give me makeup or nothing.
Did you have to like repeat the grade?
No, I still ended up passing because I only failed like a marking period, but because it's 2 marking periods in a year, so I only failed like that 1 marking period. So
That sounds really terrible.
yeah.
So thank you for sharing, Tionne. So Rohini, what happens if I'm kicked out of my class and my parents aren't notified?
So the school is supposed to notify your parents if you are removed from class, but I think, as we know, it happens a lot that schools will or teachers will remove students from class without telling parents. What you could do is you could talk to your parent about reaching out to the school and making it and having your parent, or as well as you, make it clear to the school that you know that every time this happens, you're entitled to some sort of notice that it's happened. And in addition to the notice, your parent is also entitled to meet with the principal and with the teacher to talk about why you were removed from class, to see if they can prevent it from happening again.
So what happens if my parents aren't able to come with me to the hearings and I got like suspended?
So it gets a little challenging there. Usually in suspension hearings, because until you turn 18, your parents are the ones that have the education rights, which means that they have to be there to sort of serve as your representative in these different hearings. If there should be ways, and there are ways, to sort of reschedule to make it more convenient for them to be there. The school should be willing to work with you and with your parent to make sure that they can be available during these sort of hearings or meetings about suspension. Sometimes you can do things over the phone and have like a call instead of a meeting.
Okay, so one thing a lot of youth have to go through in schools, if they wear uniform, is like getting detention if they don't have uniform on and stuff like that. But what in a scenario where a school stops a kid from coming in to school because they're not in the right shoes, or they don't have their right tie on, stuff like that? What can you do in that predicament when they stop you from walking in?
So you'll see in the discipline code that students can't be suspended for dress code violations, and so they might be able to get like some form of detention, but they can't be removed from class, and they also can't be refused entry into the school. And I think in that scenario, really talking to the school and potentially having your parent or an advocate come help you talk to the school about about the fact that you're entitled to an education, that you have a right to be there, and that the school shouldn't be denying you access to an education based on a dress code violation. And what you can do is you could actually point to the specific page in the discipline code where it talks about dress code, and you can see right there that it says that a student can't be suspended and can't be they can't be suspended for a dress code violation.
On page 30.
Yes, it's on page 30 of the discipline code.
What should schools do differently about the situation instead of stopping them? What should they do instead of stopping the kids?
Well, I think there's a number of things that schools could potentially do. Talking to students about why they aren't wearing the uniform. It could be that day, they didn't have access. They didn't have the right shoes available, or they couldn't do laundry, and so they couldn't get the right shirt. There could be reasons why that are not just that the student is trying to cause some sort of issue. I think that if schools were to approach students and sort of give them the benefit of the doubt and talk to them about what's going on, and maybe the school could have some extra shirts or extra shoes or something that students can wear if there is such a strict dress code. There are other things other than disciplining or suspending or punishing a student that they can do, especially for something like a dress code violation where no one is getting hurt by that.
So another thing that a lot of students get into trouble for is like lateness. So our question would be, since we live in New York, there's a lot of reasons that we could be late, like the subway wasn't running, there's construction. So some youth have been telling us that they've been getting detention for 3 hours. And we've heard that schools tell the youth that they won't be able to come back inside the school if they continue to be late, and sometimes they keep students out for being late unless they get their parents involved. So are these suspensions?
So coming late to school, again, is sort of similar to a dress code violation. Students can't be suspended for that. They can potentially be given some sort of in-school disciplinary response, like detention or something like that. But again, it's a situation where, especially if there's a reason why the student's late, it doesn't make sense for a school to suspend a student for something like that. And I think, talking to schools about why it happened, and then also that, if a student's showing up to school, the school should be accepting them and should be providing them with a safe and supportive environment so that they can actually learn. Because that's the point of schools. The purpose of schools is not to punish students. It's not to make students feel unwelcome. And so for lateness, I would say that suspension is definitely not allowed. But even something like detention is probably not appropriate.
Okay. So let's keep talking about a little more ways that youth get disciplined in schools. So, cutting class, for example. Some schools either give students detention or call home, but in the moment, they use now they take kids to the school balcony, in an auditorium or the dean's office for the duration of the period. It's a good while. What happens if a student is kicked out of class and while they're out, they get marked as cutting?
So do you mean they're kicked out of class by the teacher, or is that?
For example, the student may be playing around horseplay, talking to your friends, and the teacher's I've had enough, get out of my classroom. And while you're outside roaming the halls, they because you want to act a fool, I'm gonna mark you as absent. Or cutting, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if a teacher is kicking a student out of a class, then that should be considered a classroom removal. And so that should be marked as a classroom removal. And then all the things that I mentioned earlier where, the teacher needs to notify the principal needs to call the parent has a right to a meeting with the principal. All those things should be happening every single time a teacher kicks a student out of class. And they definitely shouldn't be marked as cutting or marked as absent, because that's a form of discipline.
So what can youth do in the moment of these situations? Sorry.
I think that knowing your rights, knowing the discipline code, knowing what the school is and is not allowed to do, is probably the first thing. And then, trying to tell or talking to deans or principals or teachers about those rights, and maybe have a copy of the discipline code with you, and show it and show the ways that what the school is doing is not proper, is not in line with the discipline code. Things like that. I don't know if you two have any other ideas what students could do.
They could host a meeting amongst other students who there's been a situation similar to what happened to them, and then they can all join together and explain to the principal that how teachers are handling the situation makes them feel uncomfortable, and it's not really benefiting them in any way. So they would like to see a change, and I'm pretty sure the more voices the principal will hear, they're not one to disappoint students, so they'll definitely take it into consideration.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. There's definitely a lot of strength in numbers, a lot of power there. Yeah. What could students do to help some of these issues in schools? What are some things?
If this has happened to you, and basically what you can do if you want to make sure it doesn't happen to other people, you can go around and enlighten people about the situation that you went through, and making sure that they know what the disciplinary code is. And say if you have some time, you have free time, you can go and print some pages of the disciplinary code, and make sure you highlight some the most important things about the uniform and about you being late and stuff. And you can post it around the school, and if your principal does something and be petty and tries to take it down, you can do it more. Just post it boom, 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 back to back.
What would be cool is if each class was required to have a copy of the discipline code. So if a student needed it, they would be can I see the discipline code real quick? And the teacher's gonna be ugh. They give it to you reluctantly, so you'd be what you're doing here is a violation of this one. I think I'll be staying in class.
What if somebody has it in their backpack and just what'd you say?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
I did it to my principal. He tried to suspend me for cursing, and I was first of all, did you not see the pamphlets that I was handing out today? It was a day that I was doing the enlightenment for the historical justice, and I was I had the pamphlet in my book bag, and I was just what? You cannot suspend me for that. Anyways, I think we have a better understanding of suspensions, but we want to know more about detentions. Can you tell us a little bit more about detentions?
So, unfortunately, schools are allowed to issue detentions. It's considered, and it's sort of listed under the discipline code as an in-school disciplinary response. But at the same time, schools need to be reasonable about the type of detention that they're giving students. And then also, if a student misses detention, they're not allowed to be suspended just based off of missing detention.
I did not know that. What happened was my sister, she was late to school a lot, and then there's this awful lady who sits at the front of the school and monitors students as they come in. So since my sister comes in late a lot, she was oh, this Saturday you have detention. And so my sister had a lot of things going on since we were going to Connecticut that weekend. So my sister didn't show up. So the lady, when my sister comes back to school on Monday, she's oh, why weren't you at detention? And my sister was oh, I had a family thing in Connecticut, so I couldn't have gone. She was oh, but why didn't you let your mom call us or something? Excuse me. So my mom was kind of upset about it first because one, the lady herself didn't call her about my sister having detention. My sister had to come home herself and say she had detention on Saturday. And overall, we didn't agree with what the woman was doing, and she was one of the faculty members. So my mom came in the school next day and gave her a talk.
Yeah. But we have some students in our community that comes late by 3 minutes, and they still have to stay after school for 6 hours.
After school for 6 hours?
No, I meant to say get out at 6.
Oh.
But yeah.
That's still a long time after school.
Yeah, they don't even get out at 6. They get out past 6.
Yeah.
some schools, I remember that the school that I used to go to, you get in school at 7:30, you get out of school at 6 o'clock. And if you was to have detention, you wouldn't leave out of the school until like 8:30.
That's a long time. I mean, I think, even though schools are allowed to give detention for something like lateness, I think it depending on the situation, it doesn't really make sense to issue such a long detention for something like just being late 3 minutes to school. And that's where, and I know a lot of organizations are trying to push for more restorative justice in schools in order to in order for schools to provide options other than things like detention and suspension and classroom removal when there's an issue in school, and really stop punishing students for things like lateness or dress code violations or cursing or things like that. Yeah.
So on that note, we talk a lot about low-level offenses such as being late, dress code. So what are some higher level infractions, and what are punishments that fall through those?
So in the discipline code, it does have higher level infractions. All the infractions are broken down from levels 1 to level 5, and levels 4 and 5 are really the more serious, dangerous behavior. A lot of the infractions have to do with fighting. Some infractions are related to bullying. Others have to do with bringing weapons into school, things like that. For more serious infractions, often the consequence is what's called a superintendent suspension, and that's a suspension for over 6 days. And the way that works is if a school believes that a student violated one of those infractions, then they will issue a superintendent suspension. Your parent will get a notice, a superintendent suspension notice, within 24 hours, and then on that notice there will be a date for a suspension hearing. Yeah, and so for these more serious infractions, a suspension hearing should take place within 5 days of the actual incident.
Your organization, the Advocates for Children, do you guys only intervene when it comes to higher level infractions, level 4 and 5, or do you help out with lower level infractions? Because from what we know is that if dealt with incorrectly, lower level infractions can turn into something higher, as a student may feel as if they're not getting the help they need, and the school's not helping them at all.
So, Advocates for Children, we work with all New York City students that are facing some sort of barrier to education. Most of our suspension representation is for these higher level infractions. So we represent students in suspension hearings in all 5 boroughs. But we will and can provide information to parents and to students about the lower level infractions if they call our education helpline. And I will give you the information.
And you also mentioned suspension hearings a lot. Do those take place in the school? Is there a court? Is there a jury?
So there are suspension hearing offices in every borough, and I think 2 in Brooklyn. And it is a little bit of a mini trial, but it takes place in a conference room. There is a hearing officer, and the school will have a representative, and then you and your parent will also be there. There are a number of different suspension advocates across the city, and actually on the suspension notice there's a list of the different places you can call. So Advocates for Children is just one of them, but there are a number of resources there that students can and parents can call if they get a superintendent suspension. So yeah, when you were mentioning higher level infractions, something that we see at Advocates for Children and something that is reflected in a lot of the data that the New York City Department of Education has put out is that Black students are much more likely to get some of these more serious infractions than white students, and it's the same goes for students with disabilities. They're much more likely to be found to have violated these higher level infractions than students without disabilities, which means that Black students and students of color are missing way more school because of suspensions than their white peers. And this is a problem that Advocates for Children and I know Sisters and Brothers United has been trying to work on through pushing the DOE to institute restorative justice, to really put an end to long-term suspensions in New York City.
Other than you and Advocates for Children, who can students and parents go to when they feel like their schools are abusing power?
There's Bronx Legal Services is one of them. Legal Aid is another. So there are a bunch of organizations in New York City that do this kind of work.
Obviously, this is all great information, but where can students or anybody go to get this information?
Well, the New York City Discipline Code is available on the DOE's website, so I would definitely encourage students to go to their website and check that out. There's also a lot of resources and information on my organization's website. So Advocates for Children has a bunch of guides about suspension, about what a suspension hearing looks like, things like that. And I can give you guys the website address, or the website address will be below. So you can click on it and find and access our guides and resources.
This has been an amazing discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but there's so many questions we still want to ask. So down in the comments below, if you have any questions, we'll try and get to you as soon as possible. And we want to thank everyone for watching, and that's the